So we're ready to get into our first panel, which is focused on ethically applying AI to critical space missions. I'll turn it over to our moderator, Heather Pringle, the CEO of Space Foundation and a retired general in the United States Air Force. First, I'd like to say, ma'am, thank you for your service, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. I'm Heather. Thanks to Garrett for that little blurb, but it truly is an honor and a pleasure to be here, and really grateful that you can all join me here today. So, artificial intelligence comes with a whole series of opportunities as well as challenges. We're really excited about what it can do to accelerate, but the challenges have been in the news and in the press about the most dire consequences. And that's really where ethics can be brought in to help govern this process. And today that's what we'll explore. And with me on stage, I have three very distinguished individuals, and I'm going to introduce them briefly before we get into the conversation here. So immediately to my left, we have Mr. Seth Whitworth, who is the Associate Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Cyber and Data. And so he's at the headquarters just across the street, and he's charged with equipping Space Force Guardians with innovative technologies to digitally transform the Space Force and gain asymmetric advantage over our adversaries. You oversee the development of policy and strategy, shaping digital infrastructure, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and digital workforce requirements. He also serves as a reservist in the Air Force, and prior to his time in the Pentagon, you were also part of a consulting company helping local and state governments in their digital transformation. And then to my in the middle here, we have Dr. Dave Prakash, and he's the Director of AI Governance at Booz Allen, and you develop the processes, policies, and infrastructure to ensure Booz Allen develops and delivers AI safely and responsibly for itself and others. Dave also leads efforts to help clients develop their own AI governance structures and develop and deploy AI responsibly. In your background, you have a physician, a medical doctor background, and you also joined the Air Force as a pilot, a test pilot, and you served for 12 years, and thank you as well for your service. You have a BA in chemistry from Johns Hopkins, an MD from Upstate Medical University, Syracuse, and a master's in business from Stanford University. So thank you, Dave, for being here. And at the end, we have Mr. Ramsey Brown, who's CEO of Mission Control AI, a San Francisco-based artificial intelligence company building the synthetic workforce and warfighter. Leads a small, mostly human team in realizing and securing tomorrow's advanced agentic autonomy today. Mission Control serves the US, UK, and European commercial and defense markets, where they deliver synthetic workers, end-to-end, autonomous digital twins for any knowledge worker role. And Ramsey is also a senior research associate at Cambridge University in the UK, where you focus on cyborgization and post-human economics, and holds an MS in computational neuroscience from the University of Southern California. So welcome to the three of you. Thank you all for being here. So the first question is going out to Ramsey, and it's really about why is the topic of ethics and AI important today? What makes this moment unique in the timeline that we've seen? Ethics in AI is not new. It's been around. We've been discussing it for a while. But why is it unique to discuss today?
I think it's an interesting question. And it's an interesting point in time we find ourselves in, having this conversation February 2025 compared to even 3 or 4 months ago. For the reasons that we're sitting only a few blocks away from the Pentagon, which is going to be one of the few places that is not going to be touched by the reversal of Executive Order 14110. 13110? 13110?
14.
14110?
14.
So under the Biden administration's functionally AI ethics, AI safety bill, which was describing a trustworthy mandate requirement across the departments and agencies that are on the CFO list, with the exception of the national security community. That has now been reversed. Only a few months ago, we could have sat here on this stage with relative confidence and relative security about not only the importance of AI ethics as a concept and a practice space, but that this was a national level priority. And that is not the case anymore. And yet, as each day passes and we find that the capabilities of machine intelligence systems both get deeper, so more competent, broader, capable of doing new things, and further along in deployment, so actively rubber hitting the road out in real, both commercial and mission contexts, we find that this conversation actually is gaining importance even while it appears to be disappearing from our federal discourse. The national security community is one of the exceptions on this, for which they get to make up their own rules about what AI ethics and AI safety should be. Two, I think that this is particularly interesting because, as we're coming to find, most of the AI ethics conversations that the United States and its allies have had have all been largely whiteboard exercises. We, ourselves immediately, are not per se actively engaged in first-party hot conflict for which we would have to assumption test our decisions about where ethics and intelligence in the field of warfare have to intersect. We haven't actually had to have that rubber hit the road quite yet, so to speak, for ourselves. And yet right now, there are people making decisions today about the code they're going to write to train a neural network that will deploy on a small Arduino chip, that they will put on a balsa wood drone, that they will fly over Russia or Ukraine as a semi-loitering munition that may autonomously make decisions that end in the destruction of human life. That is a hard conversation to have. And it is fundamentally a conversation that abuts up against our assumptions about AI ethics. And we're kind of watching it from the sidelines. And yet, we spend so much time thinking about this topic. So I find it to be a really compelling thing to think about now, because it is still such the center of what our focus needs to be. And we're watching all of these things play out in real time, in real life, in real ways that are no longer whiteboard conversations. And we need to come to find, what do we really stand for and believe in when it comes to AI ethics, particularly for strategic engagement, before we find ourselves in those similar positions where our tires do finally hit the road and we have to see whether or not our assumptions about AI ethics meet the light of day of hot conflict. And we aren't there yet, but we should hope to never find ourselves there. But in the event that we do, we're going to want to know what we actually do believe.
So what I hear you saying is that on the one hand, the commercial market might be helpful in determining where some of those lines in ethics are, playing it out with the end user, but for national security purposes, we truly want to determine where the lines are before we get into something that is more of a hot conflict.
And that would be great. And if we have to find out those things on a whiteboard and in polite panels and in nice workshops, the AI ethics remains everybody's favorite golf clap TED Talk concept until we have to admit that there are real trade-offs here. And people are going to have to become comfortable with the real trade-offs of, do we make that decision or not? Because it abuts up against maybe an ethical percept we have about what our virtues and values are. And we have to determine what is in line and what is out of line. And we haven't had that moment yet. We hope to never have to have that moment. But the more time we spend working on that reality, the better we're going to find ourselves prepared to make good decisions that still adhere this technology to our virtues should that time come.
Thanks, Ramsey.
Of course.
So let's talk a little about, how do you define ethics in AI and who determines what is ethical and what is not? And I'll start with you, Dave.
All right. So there is no single definition. I mean, to talk about ethics, it's a philosophical debate about right and wrong, good and bad, what's fair, what's not fair, what's just, unjust. And that's very much context driven. So, you can make the case in China, there's going to be, just based on countries, for example, there's going to be a very different set of experiences and a different environment that's going to drive a different set of baseline for what's ethical. So by country, it's going to vary. By religion, it's going to vary. And even in this country, I would argue, we're having a lot of debates on what's ethical and not. And I would go so far as to say, look, I don't think we could get everyone in this room to align on 100 AI or ethical principles, because we're all going to have our own opinion. So starting with that framework, there's a lot of gray area. And so when we apply it to AI, how I think about it is, what are the things that are less debatable? So is an AI system accurate? Is it resilient? Is it reliable? Is it safeguarded against adversarial attack? Is there accountability and traceability? Those are the things that I think about as some of the standards for ethical AI. But part of your question was, who determines what's ethical AI? And, on the one hand, a lot of what Ramsey said, these are all great concepts in the void of peacetime. But I always look at it, every problem is fundamentally a people problem, and so ethical AI, I offer this, or let me add this other context. I've been a part of a lot of conversations with regulators and politicians, especially AI in healthcare, which is where I first cut my teeth in the AI space. And people are saying, wait, you're building robot doctors, they're going to kill people. There was this fear of AI. And so ethics, this whole conversation about ethical AI, I think is in response to the fear of what AI can do when it goes wrong. But I would argue it's not the AI, it's not the code, it's not the technology you need to be concerned about so much as the people building it, the incentives and motivations of the people designing this AI. Because AI is just math, it's numbers. It doesn't have an opinion on right or wrong. And so the real concern is, who's building it. And I would make the case that, if you're looking to purchase AI or you're looking to develop AI and you're looking to find a partner, you might want to ask, what's the history for your partner? Do they have a history of exploiting privacy for profit? Do they have a history of deploying AI that's known to cause harm to certain segments of the population? And if the answer to that is yes, then how confident can you be that the AI that they're going to develop or deploy is going to be ethical or match your particular principles and values? So I think we can have the conversation about ethics, but ultimately it's the motives and incentives of the people designing it that I think has the greatest impact.
Thank you, Dave. And Seth, any thoughts on how to define ethics in AI, who determines it, and from a military standpoint, being a part of the service, what if adversaries have a different approach to ethical AI?
Yeah, absolutely. This is for sure something we discuss a lot in the small building down the road. But it kind of goes back to the piece of how do you define ethics for which component of it, right? So like if I discuss just from a military perspective, we're not starting from ground zero. We operate under a law of armed conflict. We operate under national security strategy, national defense strategy that advocates for rule-based order. So how do we apply those principles to the use of a technology? And AI, Gen AI, all of those components are just the combination of people, process, and technology. So we're not starting from ground zero when we're evaluating what our ethical use or behavior or how we'll use these tools are. We have a really good, strong foundation from which to evaluate and apply them. The DoD has gone out and kind of defined what some of the responsible uses of AI are, and a lot of it was already touched on. We want to make sure that it's traceable and accountable. We need to ensure that it's governable. Getting back to we want to make sure that we're not releasing AI that our adversaries could then potentially use against us. So is it cyber secure? Is it meeting all its marks? And then we really have to get after the people aspect of things. I think there's this scary thing in the world right now that is AI, and maybe it's based on Hollywood or movies or wherever it is. But if you just look at it as people, process, and technology, how do we build, train, and equip a workforce to leverage those tools and capabilities from the lowest level of I need to write a report all the way up to the use of lethal force, leveraging AI tools. It's about the people using it, the people building it, and the partners along the way that make that happen.
Well, and I think the human aspect of this is an important one. And so if we are talking about humans in the loop or humans interacting with this, what have you seen, Seth? Yeah,
the space domain in particular is one that we are not currently experiencing with many people, although you heard some before that have. we're going to continue to experience it through the data, and that's data perceived through sensors, through capabilities, through all of these pieces, and this massive amount of data is where we can really start to leverage this AI to make sense of it. But again, I asked AI, right? We all go to this question of what's the worst case scenario, what's the Skynet, what's the whatever. I was curious what AI thought the most terrifying thing of a human would be. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, what are you afraid of when we think about humans? And the response it gave was exactly what I'm talking about. It said, I'm afraid of data. I'm afraid of bad data. I'm afraid of not being able to explain a decision that I made. And I'm afraid of not being able to understand that process. So if we boil this all down to the ingestion and evaluation of data and start from there, we can then enable, for me, guardians to go out and train the models and equip those pieces. And on the tail end of that, we can train them for things to look out for when the model goes awry, because I have yet to see a perfect piece of technology that does not have an error of some sort. And so how do we change our focus in our TTPs to ensure that we're looking out for those things ahead of time? How are we evaluating them as they're being built so we can know where to evaluate further on down the line?
Dave, you have a lot of experience with human-computer interaction and thoughts on this. So how has the role of humans with the technology been evolving?
Sure, and what we're getting at is nothing new or specific to AI. I mean, we've been talking about human systems integration, human factors for decades across so many other industries, and we really need to just take all those lessons learned in how we build a car, how we create systems for people to monitor hydroelectric dams. And so one of the key areas here is automation. I think a lot of what AI is going to do is automation, and one day when it's fully trustable to completely automate some processes, I think we can step back. But I think for the near future, there's going to be this period of time where there's going to be human-machine teaming, and how do we design systems so that they're most adapted to the unique characteristics of humans? And so that's human factors. And the example with automation, I always think about flying and autopilot systems. I mean, you've all seen the news about these complex aircraft now that are on autopilot 95% of the time, and when something goes wrong, pilots sometimes struggle to actually intervene when intervention is necessary. And there have been studies in the human factors world for years where the frequency with which someone interacts with a system, as that frequency goes down, the less likely that person is to intervene when intervention is necessary. So this is like your train engineer that sees a fully automated train suddenly malfunction. They go, wait a minute, the machine's going to fix itself. Let me just wait until the train goes off the tracks and something catastrophic happens. I like to argue I flew a Cold War bomber with an autopilot system that tried to kill me at least once a week, so I never trusted the system, so I never got complacent. But I think all of you have experienced this. How many times have you navigated somewhere using your GPS? And it's somewhere you've been 10 times. And each time you get in the car, you're like, wait a minute, I need to follow the GPS. That's automation bias. That's the complacency that kicks in because you're no longer paying attention the way you used to. I think many of you remember writing directions on the back of an envelope and then having a map in your glove box, and then the one time you finally made it there, it's so ingrained in your brain that you don't need to, you remember how. And so I think this is what we're going to see with AI. As automation is still dependent on humans, we really need to understand the characteristics of humans. Another example is with self-driving cars. There's a reason why we don't do level 3 automation, because we can't trust people to put their phone down and to intervene and take over when the computer vision model in a car can't tell the difference between sunlight glare and a white tractor trailer, and someone dies, someone has. And so we're not paying enough attention to the human element in the teaming today. And I think when we think about space applications, long endurance space flight, when you're isolated, potentially for a couple of years at a time, and you're using LLMs that are disconnected from the internet, we really need to think about where it can go awry. What kind of testing is involved so that astronauts can have confidence in the system that it's not going, or astronauts in isolation for 2 years. That's a different subject than an astronaut at ground speed 0 in a controlled environment. And so we really need to think about the human element and design AI to address those human factors.
So we've kind of started with a bit of a near-term today discussion, but Ramsey, you're thinking well past that. So where do you see the future of human and AI interaction, and what is the importance of ethics and all of that?
Sure, and I just want to submit to Dave my Waymo account as counter evidence. So I live in San Francisco. I take a level 3.5, probably fully autonomous Jaguar like 4 times a week, where I hail it on my phone and it politely greets me with my name when I open the door because the Bluetooth got close enough. And then, like magic, this thing just takes off through the suburban war zone that is downtown San Francisco and fails to strike any of the pedestrians, urban ne'er-do-wells, potholes, muni buses, random ad hoc things in its environment. As I'm sitting there, just fumbling around on Twitter on my phone, it is wild how fast our baselines drift around trust with autonomous systems. And the things that seem impossibly complicated for an AI system to solve, it does appear, we now have the data to suggest, because we've been doing this for, as a field, the better part of slightly more than half a century. And in modern times, so I'd say everything probably, 2012 cloud revolution to today, so we've got a good decade and a half of cloud progress under our belt, which allowed for really greater data density and on-demand compute, which is a lot of what kicked off the current trend and revolution, and why we're having a panel like this now as opposed to 5 years from now or 5 years ago. So we're just finally at this part of the maturity curve. What we found time and time again is that things that we said are categorically off the table for AI to do, especially around autonomy, are entirely downstream of how willing we are to be patient or spend the money or the cost of electricity. So the things that we said GPT-2 couldn't do or shouldn't do, and I do mean those as distinct, couldn't do in the sense of, man, this chatbot is trash, it barely produces legible English, and then the risk community looking at this trash chatbot and saying, this thing is actually so good, we should not publicly release its weights. That would be a national security concern. And that was 4 or 5 iterations ago of language model capability. We looked at and confidently said it was probably going to take us decades to get beyond a absolutely garbage chatbot to a thing that even remotely generated passable human text. And then it turns out decades was really like months. And then from when we got to GPT-3, through to chat, through to 4, through to 4.0, through to 4.01, 03, now we're finding that we are probably in a good, hard, fast takeoff scenario towards really good generalized machine intelligence. Everything I've just said 2 years ago would have sounded asinine. You would have booed me off this stage and sent me back to the loony bin that is California if I'd said that in 2023. And yet we find that with training runs, with our willingness to sink the cost into the electricity and the fundamental GPU watt hours that it goes into training these systems, the quality of data we get against them, things that previously seemed science fiction become science fact, which has now become logistics. And I think about the old 4-star quote of amateurs talk strategy, experts talk logistics. So what's the interesting question around logistics for the future here? To me, it is that the interesting future of how humans and sufficiently advanced and autonomous machines interact. Downstream and apropos of nothing, of safety risk, of employment risk, of some of the long tail that we consider really AI safety things around containment, control, alignment, corrigibility, the holy cow, we invented a thing as smart, if not smarter than us, and it runs at industrial scale. How many of our critical systems can we still count on? Ranging from culture and psychological warfare containment through to who runs the critical infrastructure of things like the power grid and the things that fall under DHS that keep the country safe. Apropos of none of those things, what does all of the good outcomes look like, and how do humans and machines interact? The interesting question to me becomes that of taste. There are some things that no matter what, Dave Prakash is going to be better at than the most sophisticated AI system, because they are downstream of the unique collected experience of your life and the things that are very, very hard to trap in tokens and latent space that you can't get into the training data properly, for which Your unique lived experience provides you strategic edge on particular taste-driven decisions. And the way that we end up operating with these machines in that not very far near future is, Dave, when so many of the daily things that today seem like, yeah, we could barely trust a machine to do that, now become as rudimentary as the machines that route the packets of your traffic for which the people on Zoom are listening to this right now. Like those we treat high-level things like those low-level abstraction layers. When more and more of our life goes to that, the last thing that you and I or Seth or Heather are doing are things that involve taste. They're things that involve that human discernment and human judgment that no one but Dave could do, or no one but Seth, or no one but Heather could do. That to me is the interesting question of like, what does the near and even farther afield future of this look like, is when more and more just becomes logistics with these things. Where do we still have our edge? And that edge lies in those things that no one but Heather could accomplish. That to me is the interesting thing.
And I think that's a really great jumping off point to discuss applications and how do you see that being applied into the Space Force. Where is AI most effective? Where do you want the humans? Where are you going to want more agent, autonomized activities going on? And how are you doing it today? And if you would, there was a memo that once put a pause on artificial intelligence in the Space Force, and then you've rescinded that so that AI could continue to be developed. Can you kind of roll that all into an understanding for us?
What pause? Y'all didn't hear about a pause, did you? Yeah. For sure, I'd love to touch on it. I think we need to go back for just a quick second to the risk conversation, because it is a really unique one to explore when we start talking about space. I think back to Lieutenant Whitworth, who operated a satellite, and it was me to one satellite, and the partner next to me sat them to one satellite, and we operated that satellite individually. And that made sense at the time because the DoD had the largest constellation on orbit, and we were doing just fine. That very quickly, exponentially changed as more commercial providers started launching more equipment, and then the DoD itself pivoted to more resilient and proliferated architectures. No longer can I have one Guardian flying one satellite. There's going to just be too many satellites and not enough Guardians. And so we have to evaluate the risk of where can we pull Guardians out, where is that trust level, because unlike the other domains, if there's a conflict on land, when the conflict ends, you can clean up the land. When there's a conflict at sea, you can clean up the sea. Space is not one we can actively go up and clean out right now. And so what happens if there is kinetic conflict in space and we can no longer use or levy that domain? We have to prevent that first mover or first strike capability. And so where can we start to leverage some of these automations, and what trust level is required where I now can have one Guardian reviewing 10, 20, 1,000. I don't know what that number is. It's the conversations that we're having. And there is a trust level that the domain will no longer become available because a mistake in the AI caused a repeated chain. And so we're exploring all of those capabilities. We're looking heavily to industry, thankfully. Like, we can look to some constellations that are already on orbit who are leveraging AI capabilities to do this functionality now. If you go out and talk to Guardians, I think they would say they want a chat-like capability. We've been doing AI in the space, AI and ML, just under kind of different contexts and names as we talk about space domain awareness. That's probably our number one priority right now, is as we bring in more and more data from more and more providers, how can we churn through, analyze, and make useful decisions on that space? So we're targeting space domain awareness, we're targeting some of the more autonomous pieces, and we can pull out. And then Guardians constantly ask me, like, how can I have more time to go focus on operations? I want to use that unique experience that Guardian gained doing whatever operation that they were doing that I can't train into a model right now to war game and practice and exercise and test. So can I simplify their OPR, EPR writing using a chat-like capability? Can I simplify their summarization of reports? Again, Lieutenant Whitworth used to look through a green book and see what happened the day before, and I would read line by line of like each little contact and see what happened. Can I sum that up into one sentence that AI analyzes and said, yesterday there were no anomalies, you're free to proceed, save me 30 minutes, and now I can go focus on the mission? Yeah, absolutely. And those are the capabilities that we're looking to bring. We want to enable our program offices to work with industry to bring in amazing COTS and DIB partner solutions. We want to ensure that we're doing that in a cyber secure and thoroughly reviewed and trusted process. But we also want to enable the functionality to target the more, I don't want to say mundane, because those things are very important, but where can we free up that time?
Well, I appreciate that. And, Guardians are not quiet when they want a capability that helps them go faster. So I'm glad you're listening to them.
I realize I didn't answer your Gen AI pause question, which was a good question. I don't want to dwell on the past, which is probably why I didn't answer it, because yes, it happened. Leadership at the time decided to take a strategic pause. It was not a ban, it was a pause. This was before RAG-like capabilities existed. There was, a whole lot of unknowns, and we were championing ourselves as the innovation service, and there was fear that data would leak or we didn't know those pieces. And so, we said, take a strategic pause. We have done so much since then, since that first memo went out. We held a generative AI challenge where we said, let's get after the training aspect, let's get after the industry aspect. How can we bring people in? We've targeted more use case scenarios. What do you want to use Gen AI or AI capabilities for, and how do we get after those pieces? So while we took a pause, we learned a whole lot along the way. And we were able to work with the Department of the Air Force and Department of Defense to reestablish kind of some of those guidelines and ensure that we were moving forward in a secure and way that didn't hamper innovation.
Well, and I think that's why forums like this are so important, because you mentioned fear. And really there's a lot of information or whiteboarding or experimentation that can help increase the humans' understanding and the humans' adoption of a technology so that it can be employed in a way that is relevant. And in some senses, what you're saying is the only thing that's stopping us from employing it more rapidly is ourselves and our own understanding. So AI, where is AI failure not an option in space, either Ramsey or Dave? Do you have thoughts on this?
You want to go first?
Sure. So the moniker of my organization, Mission Control AI, is per the old belief that failure is not an option. When we look at what AI failure is made of, either in the short-term, medium-term, long-term, and long-tail kinds of contexts, even outside of space in any domain, these become clear, and these go from things like ethics, compliance, responsibility, governance, through to we've got to have a talk about the economy at some point, to holy cow, I don't want to be turned into a paperclip. It would be preferred, which is a bad inside joke from the AI field, of it's very hard to encode quiet, implicit human virtues and human values into machines that have to always do the right thing, even when the right thing is nebulous and we don't know what we're asking for and no one really understands what good and evil are anyway. Those are all hard things to try to figure out on land, on Earth. When I think about those in this context of the domain of space, I think that AI actually has a lot to learn from something very unique that space has to figure out, particularly around now the advanced edge of AI that we work on around autonomy. If for whatever reason astronauts are incapable of direct communication with Earth and with ground control, or mission control, about what should be going on at any given point in time or what the correct course of action would be, there have been developed different protocols and ways of thinking around accountability and decision making in slightly more autonomous and disconnected situations. Per a point that I think Dave made earlier about what does this mean in terms of really long haul kinds of situations where we might be going quite far from Earth or quite far from communication, or in incredibly communication degraded environments, where someone needs to be able to make a decision that is the good and accountable and just and right and effective decision, either in a strategic context or even in a peaceful context. That's actually a problem in space. Like, there's a real thing space has to contend with as a domain. We're now finding that we have to do that in AI too. as we continue to build machines that are increasingly autonomous, and we give them greater and greater time horizons of autonomy. It is one thing for one of our synthetic workers to wake up and look at my email inbox and make some triage decisions automatically about what I should be alerted to or not. And that whole operation takes only a few moments, and I get a nice ping or text message, hey, you're actually all good this morning, keep going, man. That operation might last a few seconds. What happens when those operations actually last a few minutes, where I say, look, I actually want you to prep for me a little bit of background on the panel talk I'm going to go give on Wednesday. Can you help me prepare for this? And a synthetic goes out and performs some deep research to brief me on what I would need to know. And that task might take minutes. What happens when those start expanding out to hours and days and weeks of autonomous operation where there's no human supervising that in the loop? These are problems that are not dissimilar to the types of things space has had to figure out. And I think there's going to be a lot of lateral knowledge transfer and overlap from the human factors studies that happen around space to the human factors studies that need to be happening around AI. And what I can guarantee you is these problems will inevitably converge because space is very cold and very hot. There's not a lot of atmosphere whatsoever. There's an incredibly high amount of radiation at certain points in times, none at others. And it is generally a terribly inhospitable place for fleshy things to be in, which is why we spend so much time building really wonderful apparatuses that help us survive up there. And even though so on other planets or other celestial objects. All this is to say, if you really made me make a long bet about the future of space and AI, it's that space becomes a place that is mostly inhabited by AI because it is so inhospitable to life. Whether that is entirely digital systems or these are increasingly embodied systems, we already find that there's at least a planet that is entirely inhabited by robots. Mars is entirely inhabited by robots. We do send already autonomous things up there. The interesting questions become, as the work that we're doing today in increasing levels of determining degrees of freedom for behaviors and how you achieve your goals using things that are downstream of language models, as that starts trickling into what ends up into space, we will see that some of the problems that space has already figured out about how to make good decisions in degraded communication environments are actually to the benefit of AI when it has to go to space. And we will find that, Dave, to your point, you've got a language model up there that maybe doesn't have the ability to go pull resources or get information, has to be relatively clever. And the ways we think about resilience and trust and accountability should learn from what space has had to figure out, even without AI in that formula.
I'll just make one quick comment on that, and that's, the question was what's critical in AI. And so in my research doing AI for supply chain, or even trying to think about what's the minimum mission required equipment in a B-52, well, I've learned it's whatever you don't have when you need it most. That's critical. So, and then I think that concept can't be more true than pretty much any environment related to space efforts.
Absolutely. Well, we have time for one more question, and I'd love to ask each and every one of you what advice or what change would you like to see from either government leaders, congressional policymakers, or others to further advance artificial intelligence, ethics, and space applications? Seth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, going back to people, process, and technology, and really focused on the people and process, would be to enable ways to get after the training and the knowledge piece. But for me specifically, getting after unlocking industry and how do we enable industry to go solve these problems. A lot of our adversaries do a lot of their work in a vacuum, and they don't have the benefit of competition in these systems to really spurn the innovation that we're going to need moving forward. So focus on the training and demystifying AI, I think would be a great way to say that, but enabling the technology to be developed and leveraged.
Thanks, Seth.
I would say, I think we're all here because we want to accelerate AI development and deployment in this domain. And sometimes we think about hey, well, there's too many restrictions, there's too many regulations, and then that's just slowing us down. I would argue that there's a counterpoint to that, that if we can set expectations, set standards, what's required from developers, and I think you'll actually accelerate AI deployment in the long run. And what I mean is, right now, the theme is move quickly with AI. And that's great if you're talking about what's the next YouTube video that needs to show up on your phone. But what we're talking about here is something that's high impact and no room for failure. And in those environments, it's not about just being first. It's not just about being first, but it's about being first and being right the first time and each and every time. And so, that's my advocacy for AI governance, not as a source of friction or tedium, but actually a way to build confidence. So it's not about moving fast and just hoping nothing goes wrong. It's not about being paralyzed with fear and trepidation of all the things that can go wrong with AI, so you water down the capabilities. So guardians are now burdened with, not only do I have to use AI, but I got to do the manual process and double check it, and I'm not actually making any labor savings. But it's actually this third option where AI is a seatbelt, not a speed bump, to accelerate delivery of AI for mission critical applications.
Can I say
Yeah,
one
please.
quick thing?
No, yes.
Because you hit on my favorite topic. I work in policy guidance and oversight, so sorry industry, I don't have any money. But what I do have is this continued idea that governance should come in the form of enablement and not in control. So where can we implement governance and policy that enables people within these guardrails and guidelines to get after these ideas? As soon as governance becomes about controlling and stopping and doing whatever, the mission fails. We need to get after an enablement piece. So
How would you do that?
very carefully.
Perfect answer.
Yeah, no, it's a very nuanced answer, and to a degree, it depends. I strongly believe we need to bring more people to the table in all of these conversations. It's not just about what I believe or what my leaders or senior leaders believe. It's about pulling in the guardian who's doing the actual work. It's about pulling in industry who's building the tools. It's about pulling in the organizations that are trying to push this. We all have that little unique talent that we can bring, and so we need to bring that to the fight and come unified with one voice.
Well, and that kind of gets back to our earlier point that why this conversation is important right now. So if the burden is on industry to figure out where those lines are in ethics, you want to do it well before the rubber hits the road or before the conflict gets hot. So,
Absolutely. And we need to make sure we're defining our requirements appropriately and setting them up for success as well. We have just as much of an onus to define what we're looking for to get after those pieces.
is that hard to do in AI?
That is hard to. I think it's hard to do in a lot of these emerging technologies, but it can and it needs to be done. So
Okay, well, more of that, and we wish you a lot of luck there, Seth. So, Ramsey, any thoughts, advice for congressional policymakers, the government, industry?
And for everyone. So I think just
And for everyone.
general purpose. We're lucky that at this point in time, we have a little bit of knowledge institutionally built about progress studies. So like the study of human technological progress. There are people who only focus on this. How do we understand the last 1,000 years of what drove human civilization forward? What are the mechanisms? What are the trends? And one of the funny things that comes out of progress studies is that a lot of our notion of adoption of technology is totally warped by hyperscalers. From comparative general purpose technologies, like the advent of the steam engine. The first steam engine commercially available in the United Kingdom in something like the first 50 years of its existence sold something like 20 units. In the first half century of there being a steam engine available for purchase on Earth, they could not sell 24 of them. No one knew what to do with a steam engine. And that would, from today's perspective of a highly technological society, seem nuts. Like, of course you could do this and this and this and this. But people were staring at this thing going, well, I don't know, do you know what it should do? And you fast forward to today, and you hear the proponents of AI technologies say things like ChatGPT, and now I guess DeepSeek, has been the most adopted, high velocity adopted technology ever. To go from zero to some amount of millions of people who've tried it, the velocity keeps picking up on how fast that happens. And yet you chat with people and their answer is, oh yeah, I played with it once or twice. I touched ChatGPT once, I tried it, it was okay. I asked it some impossibly hard problem my friend goaded me on to try it with, and it didn't get it right, so obviously this field is a farce and I can go back to situation normal. Go play. That's the imperative. That would be the recommendation I would have, is everyone, whether you are a personal citizen, private sector, federal sector, defense space, play. Go get your hands on the technologies. Go start fiddling with them. Even if you do not think of yourself as a computers person or a data person or an innovator kind of person, if you do not have that kind of self-efficacy story of I'm the type of person who just goes and fiddles with new tech for the heck of it, you don't need to. There's no programming involved in this one. It will gladly take your Visa or American Express and charge you $20 for the good version that has an IQ of 153. Go start playing. And as you play, imagine what it means to have a general purpose mind available to you at industrial scale and how that would change how you do things. That play, that hands-on, look, I just fiddled with it, and then after 45 minutes I kind of got that aha moment of, oh wait, what if I showed it this? I wonder what it would do if I X. That starts setting in. And that's what's needed. And that's what's needed at national scale. And that's what's needed within our different branches to look at and then find pathways, to your point, of enabling and saying, for Guardians, just get your hands on the stuff. And here's pathways to getting your hands on the stuff, because no one's going to tell you from the top what you should and shouldn't be doing with this to be efficacious at it. We'll tell you what you shouldn't do with it to not break the rules, but we won't tell you what to do with it to win. You have to figure that out. And the only way you figure it out is play. You've just got to go play.
I think that's great advice, and if you can get that in the hands of Guardians, there's no stopping what you can accomplish. So if you would, please, audience, please thank the panelists for their time and expertise today. All right. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Heather, Seth, Ramsey, and Dave for such really interesting perspectives on such an intrinsically important topic. One of the things that I think that is very, intriguing about the discussions specific to space and AI is you hear the terms and actors are starting to emerge. From last year to this year's discussion, we're hearing conversations about guardians and who they are, and astronauts, and even the machines are beginning to have a characteristic of their own in this conversation. So as this language continues to evolve and AI and ethics keeps being discussed, it's just, I'm keeping focused on these actors that are emerging, especially in the space industry. It's truly fascinating, and the conversation keeps evolving, and I just love how we are focusing on that and how AI can be an enablement to those actors to get more fascinating things done. So great job with that. So at this point, we're going to take a 30-minute break. As I previously mentioned, the bathrooms are down the hall to the right, and our demos are set up right in the entryway. Once again, you can learn from our technologists about integrated, intelligent, situational domain awareness, space domain awareness, and space traffic management, virtual space ground systems, Gen AI at the edge, space-based space domain awareness processing, and our brilliant new swarms capability. So I'll see you back here in 30 minutes.